great to be on with you, Victoria, and thank you for a chance to join this remarkable forum on the urgency of developing closer financing opportunities and partnerships. I see my dear friend Tribe Masiwa, and I'm so grateful for what you and so many others here have done to help educate and engage and motivate those of us in the United States who believe Africa is the most important continent for our engagement in this century. The bipartisan delegation that I took to the continent last month visited Cabo Verde, Mozambique, Kenya, Rwanda, and Tunisia. We had the director of the Millennium Challenge Compact, Alice Albright, traveling with us. And at virtually every stop, we had a series of conversations that touched on digital transformation, food insecurity, and the importance of working together to address food productivity with regards to fertilizers and African-grown solutions to hunger and food insecurity. The Development Finance Corporation, a new entity of the United States government that I helped launch that is available to help finance literally billions of dollars of projects, and our support for increased trade through an expanded AGOA, a reauthorized and expanded AGOA, particularly important in Kenya and South Africa, and for the African continent-wide free trade agreement. These are just a few of the agenda items we were talking about. President Ruto met with us, with our delegation. We had a particularly compelling conversation about his vision for the economic future of Kenya. In some countries like Mozambique, there is an ongoing development and security challenge to be balanced with the economic development opportunities. In other countries like Kenya and Tunisia and South Africa, they're already at a stage of development where we really need to be centrally looking at investment inflows and a freer and more open trade environment.
You're talking to American investors listening into this conversation. What opportunities would you tell them exist on the continent?
I would tell them that the opportunities are broader than you realize, and that you should be willing to take some of the risk of investing in getting to know and understand a new economy on a new continent, and to come back, if you're not already there, and take a second hard look and realize that there are enormous opportunities in the unstoppable continent of this century, or if you're already there, to recognize that the arc of demography, economic development, and opportunity has moved in Africa's direction.
Let's talk about climate change, because, and yes, that deserves a round of applause, certainly. You chair the Bipartisan Senate Climate Caucus. And this is an extremely important issue right now facing not just America and Africa, the world. If you were to give advice to African and American entrepreneurs, how can they collaborate to tackle this issue of climate change?
First, if you take the example, I've used this in talking to my colleagues to try and help them understand. If you take the example of the telecommunications revolution in Africa, Kenya deployed a nationwide mobile payment system faster, more robustly, with more compelling access than the United States. M-Pesa is ahead today of where the United States is in mobile payment solutions. That's in part because there wasn't an existing embedded physical network of branch banks and a physical network of telecommunications. And so Kenya was able to leapfrog over them. Similarly, there is not a built-out physical infrastructure and electric grid all across the continent. That is a challenge and an opportunity, because it is possible for a country like Namibia to become a major player in green hydrogen. It is possible for a country like Tanzania to build out distributed generation and microgrids. So it is possible, if the regulatory environment is right, to finance and deploy astonishing solutions. Kenya gets the overwhelming majority of its energy from renewables. Most American business leaders don't realize that and need to be educated about that. We have states that are hoping or dreaming in another 10 or 20 years of being where Kenya is already. So we need to recognize what's already happened on the continent and see its enormous potential.
You mentioned food insecurity as one of the talking points when meeting with various African leaders. But what would you say are some of the practical solutions when it comes to Africa feeding its people and the world as well, potentially?
There's a number of what I would call practical challenges. One of them is land tenure and financing. Clarity of title to land and building out access to credit and financing. Building out the infrastructure for storing and transporting products, food products in particular. Way too much food is lost and wasted between the shamba, between being grown in a farm, being transported to a market town, being carried to a place where it can be consumed. That's infrastructure that was built out in this country a century ago, and there are structures that reinforce democracy, that reinforce empowering citizens, seed banks, cooperative ventures, cooperative storage facilities that can make an enormous difference, not just in how agriculture develops, but in how democracy develops, in how average citizens and communities are empowered, rather than looking to multinational agribusiness to have the solutions. I do think there are ways that electrical co-ops, seed co-ops, and financing co-ops can end up being the solution to addressing hunger, particularly in rural Africa.
Let's briefly pivot to the issue of security on the continent. Out of the 5 countries that you visited, 3 had very present and evident challenges when it came to security, if it's insurgent groups, terrorist groups. What would you say needs to happen in terms of response? And how would you rate the security situation in Africa?
Well, look, my view is that when an insurgency develops, as it has, for example, in northern Mozambique, or as it has in northeastern Nigeria, or as it has in Somalia, often there is an underlying condition where a region of a country is disconnected from opportunity, from economic development, from participation in governance, from self-determination. In many countries, this is a legacy of colonialism, that segments of the country were underinvested in or underdeveloped. It is also an ongoing challenge of connectivity, often between rural and agrarian and remote areas and the capital city or coastal areas. So I do think that there are critical ways that the United States, at the invitation of host countries, can contribute with training, with skills, with intelligence. But it also has to be linked to human rights and accountability. Troops that come into a place like Cabo Delgado and cause more suffering and human rights violations than they provide in stability can actually make the problem worse. That was not a reference to the Rwandan troops. That was just a general reference to, in parts of the continent, anywhere in the world, where untrained and unsupervised police or military go into an area, they can make a situation worse. So there are real security challenges in several countries. Obviously, Somalia and Tunisia and northeastern Nigeria and Mozambique have persistent challenges. I do think the solution is development first and the deployment of better trained defense resources second. But they have to be done in partnership.
It's been said in countless conversations throughout this program that when Africa wins, the world wins.
Literally.
You mentioned AGOA. There's also Prosper Africa in terms of programs that the U.S. is taking to ensure that Africa grows and scales what it's doing. But what would you say are some of the key points to take away from what Prosper Africa seeks to do?
Prosper Africa in the last 2 years has brought together hundreds and hundreds of transactions, tens of billions of dollars of investment on the continent. We are in a place in the United States where our participation, our contribution to the future of Africa is principally going to be private sector investment that is facilitated through our government in partnership with the development goals of our partner nations. We're here in New York, which happens to be the home of the world's deepest, most liquid capital markets, and there is enormous interest in investing in Africa, understanding what is possible in African markets. I'm very excited that President Biden is hosting an African Leaders Summit in Washington. There will be an entire day dedicated to U.S.-African business partnerships and investment. And I'll be blunt, after our last president, the United States has a significant hurdle to overcome in demonstrating that we are present, that we place a priority on investing in Africa, that the remarkable diaspora community here in the United States and our stated values are going to lead to prioritizing Africa. It is a young continent, it is a continent of incredible possibility, and a continent where the United States should be more present. I'm pleased that our Secretary of State, many of our senior government leaders, many members of Congress of both parties have been to the continent recently, but I am urging our president to make a trip as well. He served in the Senate, he's been an elected official for 50 years. He's been to Africa many times. I am hopeful we'll have a successful conference in December and that it will be followed by meaningful action in the coming year. In my role as the chairman of the committee that funds our State Department and USAID, I look forward to participating in those investments directly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Senator Christopher Coons.